and how they betray you.
So how many, you talk about MDC and MCC, are those both in New York?
Yes, MCC is in New York, and MDC is in Brooklyn.
Okay, so you also spent time in Milan, Michigan, correct?
Yes, I actually went the day. So, and I was in Otisville. I was in Goshen, New York. My first bid for a couple of weeks. I was in El Reno, Oklahoma for a couple of weeks.
Really?
Well, yeah, they ship you around, and that's what they do. El Reno, Oklahoma is a maximum security prison. So I was a holdover there for about 2 weeks. That's where I met Gene Gotti, or at least I said hello to him anyway. And he helped me out there too with some extra clothes. Because they know you don't, they knows you're a holdover. And because I was from New York, he said, "From New York, right?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay." He was in the laundry room. I was in, and then I finally got to Milan, Michigan, where I had surgery because I had a hernia in there. Matter of fact, the lady who examined me when I did it, my aunt was able to send me a hernia belt to keep it hold in because I couldn't walk unless I kept my hernia held in. It was in my scrotum.
Oh, wow.
The lady looked at me, the doctor there at the Milan, Michigan, and she said, "Oh my God, it's the worst I've ever seen." Week to 2 weeks later, they sent me to the hospital out there, and that's when I got the surgery. Yep. And then here's the two COs. They said, everybody usually gets sick on the way back and throws up. I hope you don't throw up in the car. I said, I never throw up. I was a lot younger then too. It was my first bid. So they said, all right, tell you what, I'll give you 25 push-ups. The CO says, if you don't throw up, he says, well, you got to give me 25 if you do. I says, well, I will give you the 25, but don't forget I'll be out of surgery. I won't be able to do it the same day. So sure enough, after I had the surgery, they were driving me back. I'm handcuffed. I got the seatbelt on. I'm handcuffed and shackled. They're driving crazy. I'm going like this in the car. They're trying to make me get sick, and I didn't. And all to
Oh my God.
yeah, oh yeah, without a doubt. Now, don't forget too, they gave me Vicodins in the in the hospital, but when I got back to the prison, you get Tylenol. That's it. You don't get none. They don't care. So I was in pain. I was walking around. The Tylenols didn't do nothing. But he did give me, in all to his credit, the CO did in the bullpen. When you first come in from the street, before I went back down to I was in actually a dorm at that time. Before I went back to my bunk, he did do the 25 push-ups for me. And, yeah, so I give him credit for that. But there was one other guy in there, this guy Jerry. He was from Michigan, and he asked the CO. He says, I'll take the top bunk, and Joe can go to the bottom bunk because I wouldn't have been able to climb up to the top bunk. I was that much in pain, and stuff like that. So, there was a couple of good guys I met like that in the joint and stuff like that. And look, it's just they don't care about you, and that's it. You're on your own.
Would you say that the New York prison system was different and worse, better than some of the other places like Oklahoma and Michigan that you were in?
When you get designated, it's always going to be better, because you're allowed more. Like in Michigan, I was able to get a guitar sent in, as long as it's under a certain amount of money. So they allowed you to do that. Your commissary is going to be better. There is a little bit more better when you're designated.
What does that mean, designated?
It means when you're finally doing your time, you get sentenced and you get to the prison, you're going to be doing your time. And
Gotcha.
yeah, my Aunt Betty wanted to come see me out in Michigan. I said, nah, Aunt Betty, she was sickly, and I told her, no. I said, it's better. I don't want to see you on a visit anyway. Make me feel more worse. And then I moved in with my grandmother when I came home, and for about 10 months, and she passed away. 10, 11 months, she passed away while I was living with her. Thank God I was there. And then I moved in with my aunt later on. So it was just just sad, just the way they treat you, because there's no need for a lot of the stuff that they do. Like when I went to go, I'll tell you what. So they said the doctor, they called you down to medical, and I said, okay. I said, what the hell? Why am I being called down for medical? Well, sure enough, the CO takes me down to medical, and then he goes, okay, wait here, and he locks the door. Well, the reason why they did that was because I was getting the surgery the next day. They don't tell you ahead of time because they don't want you to plan an escape.
Okay, I gotcha.
Listen, I had 18 months left to do on my bid. I wasn't going to plan no escape now. It was like stupid. Anyway, so now they put me in the hole for overnight. And I was like, damn. So I'm sitting in a box, and I'm like, wow.
And you didn't know why you were in there?
And I didn't know, but then I figured it out. And then don't you think I get a letter from my grandmother's sister, my Aunt Angie, and my grandmother too, because it was I got operated on December 17th, or 16th, and it was my birthday's the 18th, and so they sent me my birthday cards, and so it was nice reading that. You'd be surprised. Nobody realizes until you're alone, and you always feel alone no matter what. Even when you're not an orphan, but you feel funny. You know what I mean? And when you get a letter, a card, a picture, get to talk to somebody on the phone, it means. It just doesn't make you feel alone. Doesn't make you feel like you got nobody out there anymore. I used to call. I always talk about my guy's not my friend no more, Pete Savinello. I used to call his father up, and his father used to break my chops, and he used to say, "Yeah, my Joe, geez, I wish you were here. I'm making meatballs now," and all of this stuff like that. I used to call my friend Vinny's mother up, and she said, "When you come home, there's always a plate here for you all the time." My mother always treated me good. Vinny didn't even have to be home. I would just go over there if I wanted to. So little things like that, makes you feel. It makes you know what you miss. Like my Aunt Betty, I would talk to all the time. All the time, my aunt would. And I'd read the poems I wrote. I should bring some of my poems. Maybe I'll either do it on the Patreon channel, or maybe I'll just read them on a couple on air. I wrote a lot of poems while I was away on my first bid. But it was the second bid I think was the worst of all, because even though I did like a week or two in the box on my first bid, it was a lot different. When you're younger, it's different. You know what I mean? Here I was more established in my 40s, and for them to do this to me and take that 19 months away from me, nah, it wasn't right.
I wanted to ask you. You mentioned something about styrofoam earlier, about how you would take the styrofoam and use it as like a seat, so you didn't have to sit on the cold toilet.
Yeah.
Would they like confiscate things like that if they knew you had it?
They would sometimes.
Because you can melt styrofoam down and make like a pretty hard plastic.
Yeah.
And
it was so thin. Yeah,
weapon.
it was very thin. It was like sometimes you get these meals. It was like if you were like a Muslim or a Jewish person. So the styrofoam was very thin, big. You would be like a different kind of a tray they would give you. That's all it is. But they would take that away from you. They would take the things where we used to go fishing, which was this guy used to make mine. You put 3 batteries. He would cut like a toothpaste or something like that, and he would put these in there, and he'd stay. I don't know how the hell he did it. He was great. So we would go fishing at night, which is you have the long cord, and then and it had like the hook. The staple was like a hook, and you throw it to another cell at nighttime. They'd hook it up. They'd give you a candy bar if you wanted one, if you had one. Or sometimes we'd be able to wrap our magazine in it and pull it to the other cell, and we would, switch magazines because, like I said, the SEALs didn't want to do it for us.
And you'd call that going fishing.
Yeah, we say we're fishing tonight, yeah. So, we had a little radio with the earphones. So, you're allowed certain things, but, you make the most of it,
When you go to shoe, though, that all goes away, I'm sure.
Well, you get the radio still in the show.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was good. I used to listen to, different station at nighttime, but it's think about it. It's a big ordeal to get from the street into a 23-hour lockup a day, and you're not allowed. You're only allowed one 15-minute phone call per month.
Really?
That's it. Yep. And that's it.
That's when you're in general as well, or just when you're in shoe?
No, only when you're in the box.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep, and you're only allowed 15 minutes, even when you're in the in population. Then you got to wait another hour before you call again. See, when I first went in, you can stay on the phone as long as you want, as long as you had money on the commissary for the phone. But they changed that for 15-minute phone call. I guess to try to make everybody get a phone call.
Yeah, people were probably getting into fights over the phone.
Exactly. Oh God, it was. I can't tell you how many fights over that. I even had to crack a guy. I was on the phone for a long time, and he was a Nigerian guy, and he hung the phone up on me like that. He pressed the thing, and so I.
While you were on the phone?
Yep. And I turned around and started beating him with the phone.
Wow.
Yeah, I grabbed him and started hitting him with the phone like this. I grabbed his head, and this and that. So we got into a big fight, but we made up later, and the COs, nothing ever happened. The people broke it up, and then the COs came, but nobody said it was us, and I didn't have no marks on my hands because I was hitting him I held the phone like this, when you're holding it, and I just kept hitting him with like this, and I was going beep in it, but the cord would only stretch. That's why I grabbed the back of his head, and I was going like this with it.
So you got into a lot of fights when you're in prison, correct?
I got into about a good, I think 4 fights. I think 4 or 5 fights. Yeah.
Were you ever afraid that they were going to pull out a shank and start stabbing you in the side?
Yeah, I didn't know who was gonna do what. One guy when I was in I was in White Plains, New York, and there was a guy Gaines. He was a CEO up there at that time. He's probably retired. I think would still be alive. And I had a fight with some guy. He ratted on me about something in there, and he says, "Look, I'm gonna let him out for a shower. I'll let you out at the same time. I don't walk by here for another 20 minutes. So you got 20 minutes to do whatever you want to do." So he let us out. I was in my cell when the thing opened up, and he came to my cell. He goes, "Hey, like he was Colombian, I think. His name was Salazar." He goes, "Hey, boom!" I hit him. He went flying out of my cell. We started fighting a little bit. Somebody left the mop thing there, so he picked up the handle and he was trying to hit it with me. And well, I was different then, and I gave him a kick. He dropped it, and then he fell to the floor, and I grabbed him by his hair, and I was going to start banging it. It was the old prison, the old in Valhalla. It was the old, not the new one. And they had those old cast iron radiators there, and I was about to bang his head, and some guy in Spanish yelled to this other guy, Freddie, who was, we were together for a while, and he said, "Joe, don't do it," and because the other guy said, he's going to kill him, and I was going to bash his head against the thing, but I probably might have killed him because the point of the radiator was going to hit him right here because that's where I had it. And so I let him go, and then the CO came, and he was all roughed up and everything. So he says, "Hey, Salazar," he goes, "What happened?" He said, "Oh," and so Freddie said to him in Spanish, "You better tell him you fell." And he goes, "I slipped and fell, when I went for a shower." He goes, "Oh, you want to see the doctor?" He goes, "No, I'm all right." And he had a headache, but they gave him some Tylenol, and that was it. And so then me and him became no problems after that. He was okay. He just needed to learn. He was never in prison before. He thought he could do certain things he can't do.
Right.
So listen, prison's a learning experience. I mean, you just learn the hard way, and you don't want to learn the hard way. It could cost you your life there.